Hey everybody, we are here at our US-Canada Summit. I have a question for you. Do you remember Greenland? Well, Denmark sure does. And guess what? So does my guest, Tom Dans, who is the chairman of the US Arctic Research Commission. Great to see you, by the way.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming by. You have been called Trump's man in Greenland. I want to talk about that territory, but first, people may not know a lot about your background, and you've spent a lot of time both researching and investing in the Arctic.
Sure.
Why do you perceive it as such a strategic necessity for the U.S.?
Okay, sure, and thank you. It's great to be here. The Arctic is something that has been tied to the U.S. since our very beginning, right? I'm going back to even when we were the colonies, and we were whaling off the coast of Greenland. People don't maybe know the history here, but one of our roles at the Commission is to help remind people of our past in the Arctic. And clearly, the defining moment was the acquisition of Alaska, right, which has made us finally an Arctic country. But we've had periods where we were the leaders in the Arctic for a long period of time. In fact, we discovered the pole with Americans who went there to the North Pole first, and it was really the U.S. that pushed in this whole age of discovery. And we maintained this through World War II. Obviously we talked about the invasion of Normandy last week, but you have to remember that was made possible because of weather forecasting that came off of Greenland. And so that was Arctic science developed in real time and applied in real time, as well as critical minerals. We had gone up there for a cryolite mine that basically went into every Allied aircraft, 300,000 aircraft or more, the aluminum that was produced into every corner of the world. So our Arctic, whether or not we draw the lines directly, is inseparably linked both to American history and to America's future.
But how do you see the threat being different right now? And obviously the Arctic that you described from World War II era looks very different in many ways than what we're encountering right now. And there's a whole new geopolitical competition happening there.
Yeah, again, there are lessons learned in the Arctic, which is if you're not there, you're not present, there are no do-overs geopolitically. You lose something, you don't go back, especially in a nuclear age. So you've got very powerful countries that are competitors, adversaries, however you want to qualify them, that are very interested. And we have been
namely
a little
China and Russia?
Probably would be among the names that would be surfaced.
Safe bet, yeah.
Safe bet. But I'll give you an example of where we kind of fall down or we have making up to do. So the day after D-Day is actually on the calendar is June 7th, and that recognizes the Japanese invasion of Attu Island, which is the very furthest island in our Aleutian chain. And that was actually the first time since the War of 1812 that Americans had to fight to take back their own land. Bloodiest battle since Antietam. And importantly, we fought it with the Canadians. And that's our Arctic. So nobody will remember that, but this is when the U.S. went, and it was a bloody battle. It was terrible. Huge loss of life, 549 Americans, over almost 3,000 Japanese, And yet that island today, it's got the advantage of being the very furthest point in the 50 states from Washington, D.C., but it also sits abandoned, essentially, with all the traffic between China and Russia passing through it. So, lesson learned, we ignore your Arctic at your peril.
So you mentioned cooperation with Canada. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment, but first, to talk specifically about Greenland, I was in Davos this year. I can say there was enormous trepidation as President Trump was arriving from other NATO leaders about what he would say and what he would do about Greenland after proclaiming that the U.S. wants to own it, right? That de-escalated when we heard there wasn't really going to be a military intervention of any kind. But I have to say, since then, I haven't heard much out of the administration about it, and there have been so many other foreign policy areas of focus, like Iran. Even Cuba has gotten more press than Greenland. Is it still a priority?
Absolutely, it's a priority, but I think that's a credit to Secretary Rubio and his team. We've got an excellent team working together, I think very constructively with the Greenlanders and the Danes, and progress. The lack of discussion maybe in the greater context does not mean that progress is not being made. So we're optimistic.
And did you feel that, in a positive sense, that moment, the conversation that swirled in January, has led to NATO itself taking Arctic security more seriously? Have you seen that?
Absolutely. I mean, it would be hard to miss, and I think it's one of the attendant benefits of pushing that up in the discussion. It's as we said, like, there are no do-overs here. So to get out on the field and get activated and experienced requires a lot of action steps here and patience and practice. So but first thing is a mindset change, and that's what I think you've seen. And I think President Trump and his leadership has helped push that forward, and the recognition, especially, in Alaska, we're going to push forward on energy and resource development, not just for Alaskans, but really for the 350 million odd Americans that we have in the lower 48. But it's that type of thing that makes us stronger and more prosperous and better off.
Now, of course, the United States already owns Alaska, which is a part of the 50 states. Do you think that, aside from the Greenland conversation, we're adequately using the resources and capabilities of the state of Alaska to achieve these goals?
We are at an inflection point. So I think you're seeing, with President Trump's second term here and great leadership with the governor of Alaska, Governor Dunleavy, who's a close friend, you're going to see some transformative, absolutely unparalleled historical investments going to our energy sector there. So you're talking just one project alone. Again, where we're sitting in the administration, we don't champion any particular project. We want to, at this point, we want to order the whole right side of the menu. So we just moving out, but Alaska LNG, that's on the order of $44 billion, call it $50 billion alone, right? If you compare that in present day discounted value dollar to what the TAPS pipeline was in the mid 70s, that's about, 7 billion. So you're talking massive orders of magnitude. Layer on that 7 billion going into JBeer, right? Our increases around our base there outside Anchorage. And then a host of other mineral projects. You're talking upwards of, you could add it up to the high, approaching $100 billion for a state that has 740,000 people. A lot of the conversation around Canada and the US frames it as, well, they're 300 plus and we're 41. Well, if you look at Alaska, you're kind of 41, we're kind of 740,000.
Right.
So, and we have 15,000 Americans above the Arctic Circle.
Right.
So, we need to work together, and this is like, the human capital is going to be the most important ingredient in this.
So then, speaking specifically about Canada, we just heard this week from President Trump that he's not that interested in renewing USMCA, and he actually said Canada doesn't really have much that we need. He's talking about trade, he's talking about goods and services and things like automobiles, but when it comes to defense, is there a viable way to defend the Arctic without Canada?
You're defending it together, right? So the centerpiece of the U.S. national security strategy is the Western Hemisphere. We are inseparably, immutably linked there. I mean, but we also share a lot of common heritage. I mean, my own family spent 11 generations here in Canada, in the north of Canada. We came in the early 1600s. We moved out west. We're called Métis. Some of the family, like half-breeds, but then we went south. We went to America, fought in the World War II, and I think there's a cultural connection that endures. So when we fight, like I talked about Atu, we fight and we win. And I think this is, in terms of President Trump is a deal maker. So keep that in mind. He's inviting you to come to the table with an offering. So everything should be additive. But he's kind of the first president we can't even remember, who kind of comes to the table focused on United States interests, on America first, on basically what we get out of the deal. Doesn't mean that the other side can't win too. But you have to think about how you can be additive. To your question specifically, defense, right? One of the big challenges in the Arctic is communications, right? And that's limited by geography. So remember, when you talk about space, you're talking about command and control for our nuclear trident, right? Which is the shield that basically keeps everybody safe. It's the final thing. But that's largely driven from geostationary satellites, right? And they're finite, and they're tracking around the equator, 22,000 miles in the sky. Well, those lines of intersection do not permit communication really effectively above 75 degrees north, and it really falls off at 81. So you're kind of in these dark spots. Add on to that something we call ionospheric scintillation, which is a whole mess of electrons floating around and causing chaos out there. You have real major communications problems. Now, Canada was one of the first countries to dive into space weather. Absolutely essential. So where Canada can be super valuable is in predictive modeling and basically presence, and also observations, and yes, absolutely manufacturing and technology and the rest. So there are many things, and actually, like I tell people, I come from an investment background. I think the Alaska, because that's where I focus on, super exciting, and the capital is there. But the first thing if I were a younger man doing projects, first thing I would do is lock down the money. Second thing I would do is find some Canadians to come help execute it. Because I know the people who get stuff done in the cold, who I can call on, who go around the world and were very successful. Even in Russia, because I spent decades over there, and I'd go into the furthest place away from Moscow, and you run into a Canadian camp, and with the organization, they were getting it done. So credit to the Canadians, and they're good partners. We have a great working relationship. So we're optimistic.
So finally, you mentioned space, and obviously an Artemis mission was just completed with a Canadian astronaut, Jeremy Hansen, on board. Do you see, as space becomes increasingly a geopolitical frontier, more room for U.S.-Canadian cooperation there, and what would that look like in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent yesterday in a very interesting session with Eurasia Group talking about that very subject, and I think it's focus on the fact that as I said, like this problem, we need a better word for it, but like ionospheric scintillation isn't going to roll off the tongue. Yeah. But let's just call it the challenges of communication in New York and presence in the north, and that's where Canada's exceptionally well positioned to help be additive, if not, obtain maybe a leadership role. I wouldn't put that off the table. So I think, and space is a place even where we still cooperate with Russians. So talk about, what are black swan situations? Who knows? Maybe we find a way to begin to work with some of these parties again in the Arctic for the betterment of everyone. And I think that's the ultimate goal for Trump. It's a peaceful, prosperous Arctic that serves Americans and by extension our partners.
Tom Dans, thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.